Let's dive right into this explainer and unravel the absolute biggest macroeconomic mystery of 2023. You know the one. Why that guaranteed, highly predicted U.S. recession completely vanished into thin air. I mean, if you paid any attention to financial news over the last couple of years, you know pretty much every expert out there was bracing for a massive crash, but it just didn't happen. So today, we're decoding the fascinating data behind why those old academic models completely failed and looking at the brand new, totally unexpected engine of growth that took over.
Wall Street's academic models guaranteed a crash. And honestly, they were basing this on half a century of flawless data. Classic warning signs were flashing bright red everywhere, like the inverted Treasury yield curve, which is basically just when short-term bonds start paying out more than long-term ones. Leading investment banks were absolutely certain America was heading straight for a hard recession. Yet, reality delivered the exact opposite. We got a remarkably resilient labor market, surging corporate profits, and stock market indexes just smashing historical records.
And this resilience? It's truly shocking when you consider a single number. 5%. The Federal Reserve aggressively hiked interest rates past 5% to cool down what they saw as an overheated system. Historically speaking, slamming on the monetary brakes that hard is a guaranteed growth killer. It makes borrowing highly restrictive for almost everyone. Which begs the million-dollar question, right? How on earth did the economy survive such a dramatic shock to its system? Well, to solve this mystery, we first have to look at the economy's normal bloodstream. In a classic cycle, when a corporation makes a profit, they deposit it into a bank. The bank then turns right around and lends that money out, maybe to a small business looking to expand, a family buying a house, or a student. That money gets spent, it returns to the real economy, and it keeps everything flowing and growing. It's the standard economic heartbeat. It's worked for generations.
But post-pandemic, that system plugged up big time. Those sky-high interest rates from the Fed made borrowing simply too expensive for everyday economic participants. Families and small businesses, they tightened their belts and just stopped taking out loans. And because of this, the vital mechanism of transferring corporate wealth back into the real economy through traditional bank lending, it completely stalled out. The traditional engine just stopped firing,
which created an incredible paradox. Think about this. Since the pandemic, nominal U.S. GDP, so the raw dollar value of everything we produce, actually surged by roughly 1.5 times. But traditional bank credit significantly lagged behind. Lending simply didn't keep up with economic growth. This created what we call a giant, unspent credit gap in the system. It's essentially a massive, coiled spring of unrealized potential just sitting there, waiting.
So this leads us to a massive puzzle. If the everyday credit machine was broken and sidelined, how exactly did the economy avoid a liquidity crisis and keep growing? If the banks weren't pumping money back into the streets, what kept the United States from plunging into that guaranteed recession everyone was so terrified of?
The mastermind behind the survival was big tech. We're talking companies like Microsoft, Alphabet, Meta, and Amazon. They bypassed the slow banking system entirely. Instead of letting their massive post-pandemic profits collect dust in bank accounts, they weaponized them. They spent them directly on heavy physical AI infrastructure. We are talking about hoovering up hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA microchips, breaking ground on massive data centers all across the US, and placing gigantic orders for transformers, cooling systems, and power grid upgrades.
Here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. Big tech essentially transformed into a private central bank. Because they were spending their billions directly on physical infrastructure, a massive river of capital flowed straight to engineers, builders, energy workers, and equipment manufacturers. This enormous private stimulus completely offset the restrictive, painful effects of the Federal Reserve's high interest rates. They acted as their own rogue liquidity engine for the entire country.
Now the AI build-out has grown so massive that these tech giants have entered a second, even more aggressive phase. Their own monumental profits just aren't enough to fund the construction anymore. So what do? They've started taking on huge external debt. They're issuing corporate bonds and secondary stock offerings to fund the expansion. They aren't just spending their own money anymore, they are aggressively pulling outside capital into this construction boom.
By borrowing tens of billions of dollars independently, they have single-handedly launched their very own credit cycle. I mean, think about it. A 7% interest rate is a terrifying brick wall for a family trying to buy a home. But for a trillion-dollar corporation aiming for global AI dominance over the next decade, a 7% Fed rate is just a tiny speed bump. It's simply the cost of doing business. They are forcing money to circulate faster, maintaining relentless economic growth, completely independent of whatever the Fed intends.
Now you might be wondering, what about all those AI layoffs dominating the media? Surely that's hurting the economy, right? Well, What we are actually seeing is classic creative destruction. That's where new technology destroys old roles but births entirely new industries. Yes, algorithms are displacing certain white-collar roles like copywriters, junior programmers, and data analysts. But simultaneously, this exact same AI boom is triggering a massive hiring frenzy in heavy industry for the people actually needed to build the physical architecture of AI.
The math here is really fascinating. For every digital clerk let go in Silicon Valley, multiple high-paying physical jobs are being created in states all across the country to build the actual hardware. Laying high-voltage cables, assembling liquid cooling systems, pouring concrete for server farms, this heavy economy multiplier is creating tremendous labor demand. That is exactly why the U.S. job market has remained so surprisingly robust, even despite record-high interest rates. But despite this incredible boom, there is a ticking clock, and it involves a major blind spot over at the Federal Reserve. You see, the Fed makes its decisions by staring into the rearview mirror at lagging indicators. They look at things like past consumer inflation data, the PCE index, and official unemployment rates. By focusing so heavily on yesterday's numbers, they are completely missing the fact that big tech's capital expenditures, their massive spending on physical assets, is the true hidden engine driving today's GDP. And this brings us to the ultimate macroeconomic threat. What happens if those tech giants suddenly hit the brakes on AI spending, but the Fed is still holding interest rates high to fight old inflation? Well, we have a massive problem. The economy would instantly lose its main private stimulus. Orders to the supply chain would absolutely plummet, triggering cascading layoffs among builders, energy workers, and chipmakers. The very engine keeping us out of a recession would shut down, leading us straight into a severe crash.
To avoid that disaster, the Fed must execute an absolutely perfect macroeconomic relay race. It goes like this. In Phase 1, big tech carries the economy. In Phase 2, those AI investments will inevitably hit a natural plateau. This leads to the critical moment, Phase 3, where the Fed must perfectly time a cut in interest rates just as tech spending levels off. If they nail that timing, they trigger Phase 4, successfully passing the baton to the rest of the economy.
When those interest rates finally drop in Phase 4, that massive coiled spring of unspent credit we talked about earlier, it finally unlocks. The traditional economy wakes up from its slumber. Everyday Americans can suddenly afford to refinance expensive mortgages or take out new ones. Small and medium businesses can finally borrow money to expand. That lagging bank credit portfolio rapidly catches up to the real economic output.
If this transition is managed correctly, the baton is smoothly passed from a narrow, tech-driven economy back to the broader, traditional economy. The artificial intelligence investment phase organically evolves into a classic credit phase. This perfectly timed handoff sets the stage for a sustainable, broad-based, long-term bull market that benefits Main Street just as much as Silicon Valley.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question determining the future of our economy. The resources for massive expansion are sitting right there, locked in the traditional economy, just waiting for interest rates to drop. The AI boom miraculously bought us the time to avoid a recession so far, but will the Fed look up from their rearview mirror and catch the baton in time to unlock that potential, or will they drop it and drag us all down with them?